There is a country in Europe that most Americans have never heard of. Not because it is small, though it is. Not because it is unremarkable. It is, by almost any measure, one of the most visually and culturally extraordinary places on the continent. But because it sits at a geographic crossroads that history treated less as a destination and more as a corridor, a place armies and empires and trade caravans moved through, rather than stopped at. And in the process of being passed through by so much of history, it developed a character so specific, so layered, so entirely its own, that it is genuinely unlike anywhere else in Europe or the Middle East or the Caucasus or any of the other categories the world has tried, with limited success, to fit it into. This country has been making wine for 8,000 years. It has an alphabet developed in the 5th century that looks like nothing else in the world, a flowing, circular script of 33 characters that has been classified by UNESCO as one of humanity's intangible cultural heritages. It was one of the first nations on Earth to adopt Christianity as its official religion in 337 AD, and has maintained an unbroken Orthodox Christian tradition ever since, through Mongol invasions, Ottoman occupation, Russian imperial annexation, and Soviet atheist governance, never fully letting go of something that was already 15 centuries old when the Soviet Union arrived to discourage it. It has a church perched at over 2,000 meters in the high Caucasus Mountains, with a glacier behind it and clouds around it, and a view that makes every superlative you've considered using feel immediately inadequate. And almost no one outside its immediate geographic neighborhood is talking about it. This is Georgia, Europe's best kept secret. Before we go any further, if this is the kind of place you came to YouTube for, subscribe to Rome Folios right now. Every week, somewhere the world forgot to look. Hit subscribe. Let's go. The country that history passed through. Georgia sits in the South Caucasus region, bordered by Russia to the north, Turkey and Armenia to the south, Azerbaijan to the east, and the Black Sea to the west. That position, at first glance, appears to explain its relative obscurity in Western consciousness. It is neither fully European nor fully Middle Eastern. Neither post-Soviet in the way that many Western travelers categorize the former Soviet states of Central Asia, nor Mediterranean in the way that shapes most Western European travel imagination. It is, instead, something specifically itself, a Caucasian country, part of a region that produced some of the most complex and layered cultural history anywhere on the Eurasian landmass. And that remains, for most Western audiences, significantly underdocumented. But that position also made Georgia, for several thousand years, one of the most strategically significant pieces of real estate in the ancient world. The route connecting Europe to Central Asia and China, what would become, over centuries of use and infrastructure, the Silk Road passed through Georgia, specifically through a series of mountain passes and river valleys that made Georgia the most practical corridor between the Black Sea coast in the west and the Caspian Sea in the east, the trading and cultural gateway between the Mediterranean world and everything beyond it. This position brought wealth, it brought culture, it brought the cross-pollination of Greek, Persian, Byzantine, Arab, Mongol, Ottoman, and Russian influences, all passing through and leaving traces, sometimes invited and sometimes absolutely not. The Georgians endured centuries of invasion and occupation by powers that coveted the country's strategic location more than anything the Georgians themselves valued about their homeland. The Persians came, the Arabs came, the Seljuk Turks devastated the country in the 11th century. Genghis Khan's forces arrived in the 13th century and reduced cities that had been among the most prosperous in the region to rubble. The Ottomans controlled parts of western Georgia for centuries. The Safavid Persians fought the Ottomans for the rest of it, and in 1801, exhausted by the cycle of invasion and seeking protection from a neighboring power that at least shared the Orthodox Christian faith, the Georgian kings made an arrangement with Russia that they quickly understood was less a protection treaty and more an annexation. Georgia remained part of the Russian Empire, then the Soviet Union, until 1991. And yet, through all of it, through every invasion, every occupation, every attempt by foreign powers to reshape the country according to their own priorities, something specifically Georgian persisted. The language, with its impossible alphabet and its agglutinative grammar, and its verbal system that linguists describe as among the most complex in the world. The polyphonic singing tradition, unique in the Christian world, in which 3 independent vocal lines develop simultaneously without any of them serving as a simple melody and harmony structure, producing something that sounds both utterly ancient and completely unlike any European choral tradition. The wine, the food, the specific, generous, almost overwhelming hospitality culture organized around the feast, the toast, and the ritual of sharing a table that Georgians call the supra. All of it survived. All of it continues. In a country that has spent most of its history being occupied by someone else, Tbilisi, the unpredictable capital. Tbilisi, Georgia's capital, is one of the most architecturally eclectic cities in Europe. That is not a careful diplomatic assessment. It is the straightforward description of a city that was built, rebuilt, occupied, burned, reconstructed, and modernized by so many different hands across so many different centuries that its streetscape contains a density of architectural styles that should not coexist as comfortably as it does. Byzantine churches, Persian-influenced bathhouses, Russian imperial civic buildings, Art Nouveau residential blocks with ornate carved wooden balconies, Soviet brutalist apartment towers, and scattered throughout glass and steel contemporary architecture that arrived with Georgia's post-Soviet economic liberalization. The old town of Tbilisi, the Kala district, and the surrounding neighborhoods of the historic center sits below the Narikala fortress, a 6th century fortification that has been rebuilt, repaired, and partially destroyed so many times over its 1500-year history that it is now simultaneously ancient and clearly patched. Its walls a visual record of every hand that maintained or attacked it. Below the fortress, the Makvari River cuts through the old town. Above it, the Matsminda Plateau provides a viewpoint from which the entire basin of Tbilisi spreads below, the old and new city visible simultaneously in a panorama that makes the layers of historical time running through the city's architecture visible in a single glance. The Abano Tubani district, below Narikala, and clustered beside the hot springs that have been the source of both Tbilisi's name, which means warm place, in Old Georgian, and its thermal bathing culture for over 1,000 years, is marked by a series of distinctive domed brick buildings housing the sulfur baths. The springs feed naturally heated sulfuric water into bath complexes that range from basic shared public facilities to private rooms with marble and tile work, where the water itself carries a distinctive mineral smell and a temperature that, once acclimatized to, produces the particular physical relaxation associated with thermal bathing everywhere in the world, but somehow more specific, more real, more earned in a bath fed by water that has been rising from the same underground source for long enough to feature in the city's founding mythology. Legend holds that Vakhtang I Gorgasali, a 5th century Georgian king, was hunting in the forest that then covered this valley when a pheasant he struck with a falcon fell into a hot spring and was found cooked. He returned and founded a city there. Whether the legend is literally true or not, the springs are real, the baths have operated for over 1,000 years, and the story has been told so long that it has become, in the way of very old stories, simply part of what Tbilisi is. Above the Abano Tubani, the Old Town streets wind uphill through the Kala district in a pattern that maps the organic growth of centuries rather than any planned grid. The narrowness of the lanes between old stone and plaster buildings, creating the particular intimacy of a city center that was built before the automobile existed and has never been fully reconfigured to accommodate it. The wooden balconies of Tbilisi's old residential buildings are, architecturally, the city's most distinctive feature. Carved wooden screens and railings extend from upper floor apartments above the street level, providing both shade and privacy for the family life conducted on them, simultaneously closing the building from the street and maintaining a permeable, half-public connection to it that reflects a climate, a culture, and a relationship between domestic and communal space that no architectural movement since has managed to replicate. Many of these buildings are in various states of repair, some immaculate, some precarious, some somewhere between the two. A condition that gives the Old Town the feeling of a place that is being lived in actively and imperfectly rather than preserved as a museum exhibit. Tbilisi's food scene requires its own treatment because Georgian cuisine is, quietly, one of the most interesting and least internationally recognized food traditions in Europe or the wider region. The khinkali, a large, hand-pleated dumpling filled with spiced meat broth, eaten by holding the twisted top knot and biting through the bottom to drink the broth before eating the dough, is among the most technically satisfying street food experiences available anywhere on the continent. The khachapuri, Georgia's other internationally recognizable dish, exists in a variety of regional forms, the most dramatic of which, the Agerian boat-shaped khachapuri, an open bread vessel filled with melted cheese and finished with a raw egg and butter that the diner stirs into the molten filling, is the kind of dish that appears in food writing with such frequency that first encounters with it inevitably feel both familiar from photographs and significantly more impressive in reality. The Sacred Mountains. 3 hours northeast of Tbilisi, through a river valley that narrows and rises steadily toward the high Caucasus, the town of Stepantsminda sits at approximately 1,700 meters elevation, encircled by mountains that climb to over 5,000 meters in every visible direction. And above the town, on a triangular promontory at 2,170 meters, the Gergeti Trinity Church stands. The church was built in the 14th century, a single stone structure with a conical bell tower positioned on a grass-covered ridge above the tree line, with the specific deliberateness of a building placed not for practical accessibility, but for spiritual resonance. Looking at it from below, from the valley where the town sits, the church appears to float between the mountain and the sky, too high to look like part of the human settlement below, too specific in its geometry to be a natural feature of the ridge. Behind it, when the weather allows, the glacier-covered summit of Mount Kazbek rises to 5,047 meters. The juxtaposition, a medieval stone church against a glacier at 5,000 meters, is one of the most immediately, obviously striking single images in all of the Caucasus. The walk-up takes approximately 2 hours from the town, following a steep path through meadows that, in summer, are covered with wildflowers at a density that makes the approach to the church feel ceremonial in a way that has nothing to do with religion and everything to do with the particular quality of high altitude light on mountain. Grass. At the top, the wind is constant, the air is cold regardless of the season, and the view from the church's position encompasses the entire Kazbegi Valley below, the Caucasus range extending in both directions, and on clear days, the summit of Kazbek itself visible above the clouds that frequently build around the lower slopes. The church remains an active place of worship. Candles burn inside. Icons are maintained. The monks who once staffed the complex have been replaced by occasional clergy who make the climb for services, but the sacred quality of the place does not depend on continuous habitation. It depends on the position, on the specific relationship between human-made stone and the mountain it was placed on, a relationship that the 14th century builders understood intuitively that this particular ridge, above this particular valley, in sight of this particular mountain, was a place where a church needed to be. Further west, deeper into the Caucasus, and significantly more difficult to reach, the region of Svaneti occupies a series of high mountain valleys that have been, for most of recorded history, effectively isolated from the rest of Georgia by the sheer impassability of the terrain surrounding them. That isolation produced something that nowhere else in Georgia has preserved as completely a medieval architectural tradition of defensive stone towers, built by individual family clans as combined storage, refuge, and status symbols that still stand throughout the Svaneti villages, in numbers that give the landscape a visual character found absolutely nowhere else in Europe. The towers of Svaneti, some of them dating to the 9th, 10th, and 11th centuries, are not ruins. Many of them remain structurally sound, still belonging to the families who built them, passed through inheritance across 40 or more generations. In the village of Mestia, the regional capital, towers rise from the center of the settlement in clusters, their stone walls darkened by centuries of weather, their functional tops converted from military necessity to something between architectural landmark and ancestral possession. The function they served was specific to the particular political reality of medieval Svaneti, a region where blood feuds between clans were endemic enough that every family of means maintained a tower from which they could both defend themselves and conduct offensive operations against neighboring enemies, sometimes for years at a time, with minimal contact with the outside world. The feuds ended, the towers remain, giving Svaneti the appearance of a place where the medieval period did not quite conclude, where the physical evidence of a social system that existed 8 or 9 centuries ago is still standing in the village square, intact, maintained, lived alongside. If you're still here and what comes next includes an 8,000-year wine tradition and a cave city carved into a cliff face, subscribe to Rome Folios right now. This is what we do. Every week, hit subscribe. The vine and the stone. Georgia did not simply develop an early wine tradition. Georgia is, by the archaeological and genetic evidence, the place where wine was invented. Residues of fermented grape juice found in clay vessels excavated at sites in the Caucasus region date to approximately 6000 BC, making Georgian wine approximately 8,000 years old, predating Egyptian viticulture, predating Mesopotamian wine, predating every other documented winemaking tradition on Earth by at least 1,000 years. The specific method that Georgian winemakers developed and continue to use is as distinctive as the tradition itself. Kuvevri are large clay amphorae, beeswax lined, buried in the earth up to their necks. used for fermenting and aging wine in a way that maintains a consistent cool temperature through the vessel's contact with the ground, while allowing the grape skins, seeds, and stems to ferment together with the juice in extended skin contact. The result of this extended contact, sometimes lasting months, is what is now internationally known as orange wine or amber wine. Though Georgians have no need for these contemporary marketing terms, having been making this specific style of wine since before any of the regions that now dominate international wine culture had developed their own traditions. The Cuivre method was recognized by UNESCO as Intangible Cultural Heritage in 2013. The Kakheti region in eastern Georgia is the heart of the country's wine production. A landscape of rolling hills covered in autumn vineyards in shades of gold and rust, punctuated by ancient monasteries and wine estates, where the transition from modern label design at the entrance to thousand-year-old Cuivre in the cellar happens within a single building. A Georgian feast, the supra, is organized around the ritual of the toast. The tamada, or toastmaster, guides the feast through a specific sequence of toasts that follow a traditional order to peace, to the ancestors, to the guests, to Georgia, to the departed, each one requiring genuine engagement from the participants, each one delivered with a rhetorical care that reflects a tradition in which the ability to construct a meaningful, eloquent toast is considered a genuine social skill worth cultivating across a lifetime. The wine is drunk from a corna, a traditional drinking horn passed around the table, and the expectation of the supra is that the table will be laden with far more food than anyone could possibly consume, that the wine will flow continuously, that the conversation will range across everything from politics to poetry to family history, and that the evening will last significantly longer than anyone planned when they arrived. Georgian hospitality is not merely a cultural attribute, it is a moral framework. A guest in Georgia is considered a gift from God, a phrase that Georgians repeat with enough consistency and enough apparent sincerity that visitors quickly understand it is not a metaphor. 2 hours south of Tbilisi, carved into the volcanic rock of a cliff face above the Kura River Valley, the cave monastery of Varzia was constructed during the reign of Queen Tamar in the 12th century, a period considered the golden age of Georgian culture, when the country briefly achieved a degree of political unity and military strength that allowed it to project power across the wider Caucasus region before the Mongol invasions, ended the era with devastating thoroughness. Varzia encompasses approximately 6,000 rooms carved directly into the volcanic tufa of the cliff, arranged across 19 levels and extending roughly 500 meters along the cliff face, a monastic city designed to house up to 50,000 people in times of military threat, with its own water supply system, wine cellars, bakeries, and a church of the Dormition whose frescoes, dating to the 12th century, remain some of the best preserved examples of medieval Georgian religious painting anywhere in the country. An earthquake in 1283, roughly a century after Varzia's completion, collapsed the outer face of the cliff, exposing the formerly hidden rooms to the exterior and destroying approximately 2/3 of the original complex. What remains still substantial, still penetrable by visitors who move through the rock-cut corridors and emerge onto ledges above the river valley, is an experience of medieval scale and ambition that sits outside the standard categories of castle, monastery, or cave dwelling, because it is simultaneously all three and a great deal more. Fresco fragments from the 12th century survive on the walls of the main church, their Byzantine stylization and Georgian iconographic tradition visible 8 centuries after they were painted, in colors that the rock of the mountain itself has helped to preserve from the light that would otherwise have faded them. Not far north of Tbilisi, on the military highway that connects the capital to the Russian border and the high Caucasus. The medieval Art Nouveau fortress complex sits on a slope above the Aragvi River, its walls and towers partially merged with the water of the Zinvali Reservoir that was created in the 1980s when the river below the fortress was dammed. The accidental juxtaposition, a medieval fortress of the 17th century, reflected in turquoise reservoir, water created by a Soviet hydroelectric project, is one of the stranger and more photogenic accidents of Georgian history, a medieval structure gaining an entirely unplanned backdrop that manages to enhance its visual drama considerably. Georgia today. On the Black Sea coast in Georgia's southwestern corner, Batumi is the country's second city and its primary resort destination, a place that manages to be simultaneously historic and aggressively contemporary, a combination that produces a certain architectural dissonance on the seafront boulevard where Soviet-era buildings stand beside glass towers of recent construction and turn-of-the-century European-influenced residential buildings that survived both the Soviet period and the construction boom of the 2000s through a combination of luck and building quality. The Batumi Boulevard, running along the Black Sea waterfront, is one of the most pleasant urban promenades in the Caucasus. A long, palm-lined seafront walk with the particular unhurried quality of coastal cities whose primary economy is leisure, where the pace of pedestrian life adjusts to the rhythm of the water rather than the demands of a working port. Inland from the boulevard, the old city of Batumi preserves a significant stock of Art Nouveau residential architecture, dating primarily to the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when the city developed rapidly as a Black Sea port following the construction of the Baku-Batumi pipeline that carried Azerbaijani oil from the Caspian to the coast. The oil brought money, the money built buildings, the buildings survived. And Batumi's ornate upper floor facades, their decorative ironwork and plaster detailing surviving with varying degrees of maintenance across a century of subsequent political upheaval, give the city a European architectural flavor that sits unexpectedly against the subtropical vegetation of the Black Sea coastal climate. Georgia today is a country navigating a position between past and future that is never entirely comfortable and never entirely resolved. The 2008 war with Russia over the breakaway regions of South Ossetia and Abkhazia left physical and political wounds that have not fully healed approximately 20% of Georgia's internationally recognized territory remains under Russian control or influence, and the status of these regions continues to shape Georgian foreign policy, domestic politics, and the population's complex relationship with the enormous neighbor to the north. The aspiration toward European integration, officially stated government policy, endorsed consistently in polls by a majority of the Georgian public, coexists with the practical reality of geographic proximity to Russia, deep economic interdependence, and a population that is simultaneously among the most pro-Western in the South Caucasus and among the most genuinely religious and socially conservative. It is a country that wears its contradictions visibly, ancient and urgently modern, deeply traditional and rapidly changing, proud of an identity that has survived 4,000 years of pressure from outside and uncertain about which version of itself will define the next 4. And in the Svetitskovoly Cathedral in Metsketa, the ancient capital of Georgia, where the living pillar, a column said to have risen from the grave of Sidonia, who died clutching the garment of Christ at the crucifixion, stands at the heart of a cathedral built in the 11th century on the site of the first Georgian church. The Orthodox faith that has been the container for Georgian identity through more disruption than almost any other national church in the world continues its practice. Candles burn, monks chant. The frescoes on the walls of the cathedral, Byzantine in form and specifically Georgian in content, depict a cosmological vision that has been maintained in this specific building through Mongol invasion, Ottoman pressure, Russian imperial absorption, Soviet atheism, and post-Soviet nationalist rediscovery. The faith survived all of it. So did the wine, the towers, the alphabet, the polyphonic singing. So did Georgia. Europe's best-kept secret is not a secret because it is difficult to reach. It is not a secret because it lacks beauty or history or cultural depth. It is a secret because history treated it as a corridor rather than a destination, because Soviet-era travel restrictions kept it largely closed to Western visitors through the late 20th century, and because the tourist infrastructure that now serves a rapidly growing flow of international visitors has developed quickly enough in recent years that the rest of the world simply hasn't caught up yet with the news that one of the most interesting countries in Europe has been here the whole time. Waiting, feeding guests, making wine in vessels that have been in the earth for 8,000 years. Singing in three-part harmonies developed before polyphony was a concept in European music theory, and maintaining an alphabet, a language, and a cultural identity that no amount of invasion, occupation, or historical disruption has been able to permanently erase. If this video showed you a Georgia you didn't know existed, share it with someone who needs to see it too. Subscribe to Rome Folios if you haven't already. Every week, somewhere the world forgot to look. And leave a comment, did you know Georgia was this beautiful? I'll see you in the next one.